Hello and welcome to Radio Times Radio. Only joking. Times Radio is a different thing, even though it's our name backwards. No, this is the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast, but you probably knew that. My name's Huw Fullerton.
My name's Morgan Jeffrey.
And this week, we're talking about the dreaded C word. No, not Cybermen. It's the coronavirus pandemic and what it may mean for the next series of Doctor Who. We've touched on this briefly before, and we've written about it on the website. But basically, no one really knows how the worldwide shutdown in TV and film production will affect the next series of Doctor Who. But there has been some new information in the past few weeks, kind of detailing, a couple of problems that the series could face. I don't know, Morgan, if you want to sort of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, so initially, I think it was the start of this year, beginning of this year, Tracy Simpson, who's a producer on Doctor Who, she let slip at the Gallifrey 1 fan convention that filming would probably start on Series 13 in September. And then radiotimes.com, we sort of verified that independently. It was our understanding that a September air date wasn't necessarily fixed, but the Doctor Who was expected to go back before the cameras by the autumn, which would then mean a 2021 air date. And it's still not totally out of the question that Doctor Who will start filming in September. It certainly hasn't been officially ruled out by the BBC. But then more recently, Rodri Talfan-Davies, who's the director of BBC Wales, was asked whether or not he thought Doctor Who could be produced under social distancing rules, and he pretty much said he didn't think it could be done. He said a production like that, which at any point employs hundreds of people, freelance and staff, I don't believe can be made to the current standard in a socially distanced environment. Now, a few people had a crack or two at what the current standard of Doctor Who exactly means. But for fans, it's certainly interesting that a high-ranking figure at BBC Wales more or less came out and said he didn't think Doctor Who could be produced under that remit.
Also should say, obviously, Wales currently has different social distancing guidelines and restrictions than England does. They're a bit stricter there. We're back with my family have been keeping me updated. So that could also come into play, so even if stuff could get going here, it might be more difficult in Wales, although that might not be the case. It's an interesting one. Every time I've asked the BBC about, is Doctor Who going to be delayed? Is there going to be a problem with social distancing? They've basically said, we don't know yet. We're not even at that stage. Because first off, it was like, how are we going to deal with the immediate fallout of everything that's been shut down? How are we going to deal with the stuff that was supposed to be filming sooner? How are we going to deal with, we've just started filming EastEnders. How are we going to do that? I think it's very much a kind of step-by-step thing. But obviously the BBC will be making these contingency plans. They'll have an idea, which they wouldn't share with us, about what they're going to do and how they could do it. They'll be testing stuff out. They'll be coming up with things. And it is interesting to think about how it could be done. I mean, our very own Eleanor Bligh-Griffiths wrote a great piece on radiotimes.com about, what social distanced sets could look like. And it is actually pretty limited. I mean, you can't, obviously, the sort of obvious things are like you don't want people standing too close to each other, things like that. You could transfer droplets. But also just, kind of multiple people handling, equipment. Can't have people necessarily doing, like a scene where they'd kiss or even a scene where they'd hug or shake hands. You'd have to use a lot of camera trickery and, you'd have to hire a lot of actors who are in the same family. And also just the amount of people who are on set, directors, people who would be setting up parts of the set, makeup artists is a big thing. And obviously on a show like Doctor Who, which has loads of prosthetics and costumes and so on, that could be a big thing. The flip side of it is I wrote on Twitter a few weeks ago and was thoroughly schooled for it. Maybe Doctor Who would be easier because they could just have people wearing like full Cybermen outfits or people sitting in the Daleks, and then they're basically shielded, they're in PPE. But obviously it's been pointed out to me that someone needs to help them get into those costumes. So
yeah, well, it's interesting. I think there are pros and cons in a way. There's ways in which Doctor Who is sort of uniquely positioned to be able to continue being produced under these guidelines, and then there's certain ways in which it absolutely is not. So, for example, you think of things like, I know you were joking, but it is true to a certain extent, like in terms of limiting physical contact, having someone in a full outfit that to a degree that does limit physical contact. But then, as you say, they need costume and makeup to help get them into those things. There's also a big issue for a lot of dramas is romantic storylines, and the people, as you say, kissing and hugging, which this current era of Doctor Who, not so much of a problem. If it was the Russell T Davies era where that someone was snogging someone else, pretty much every episode, that might be more of an issue. But it's not a particularly touchy-feely TARDIS team we have at the moment. There's not a great deal of hugging, so that might not be as much of an issue. But then again, there's things like how will this affect the demands on cast. So shows that have a regular cast, you could just quarantine the cast for a certain period of time, and then with regular testing, you're pretty much safe there. Whereas with Doctor Who, you have a new guest cast come in every single episode, right? So it becomes much harder to work under those conditions.
Definitely. I mean, it's funny because obviously I mentioned EastEnders. EastEnders is a bit of a different thing in that they obviously just have the one set. It's a very big set, but it's all in the one place, and they can kind of just isolate everything within that, which makes it easier. Doctor Who does, to be fair, have a base, which a lot of places don't. It has a studio base, it has the TARDIS set, and they do sometimes build sets at Rothlock Studios. But, as we saw the last series they filmed, in Spain, they filmed in, all over the place. And that is presumably going to be more of an issue. Also, it's kind of like, even if they were filming in the UK, a lot of stuff is on location, just off in a field or something or other. And you kind of wonder to what extent, maybe filming outside would be easier because, as long as there's fewer than 6 people. But on a production like Doctor Who, obviously you'd have more than that. And just generally speaking, it's one of those things where you just have to think, what is possible in a normal episode of Doctor Who? What wouldn't be possible under this? And how would you kind of make a version of Doctor Who that still seemed the same under these restrictions? Like a lot of episodes where they visit the planet of, Welsh warehouses.
Yeah, and again, that thing that they have a production base, the Rothlock Studios in Wales, that again is both a blessing and a curse, because they do have, as you say, that production base. It's easier to lock down in that sense. And you have the certain standing sets. You have the TARDIS set, of course, which handily is quite large, so presumably actors could socially distance. But then again, as you said earlier, the restrictions are more strict in Wales than they are in England. True. So could you see obviously Doctor Who can't uproot entirely, say, to England because it has that production base. You couldn't move the TARDIS set very easily. But does that mean that you would, could the show film predominantly in England, where the restrictions aren't quite as tight, and you could have more location shooting, fewer TARDIS scenes, maybe no TARDIS scenes, because you don't need to have interior TARDIS scenes necessarily. I don't know. There's different options you could explore.
Definitely. I mean, the thing you mentioned as well about the cast is quite important with Doctor Who, because more than pretty much any show, Doctor Who is new every single week. Although a lot of other shows would have a lot of different sets, a lot of different locations, and a lot of different characters coming in, from one episode to the next, it would be quite serialized. You'd have quite a sort of similar sort of turnaround of people. Doctor Who is pretty unique in that each episode it has a completely different setting, a completely different story for the most part, and largely a different cast. And it's kind of like, you just think the problems with coronavirus and social distancing increase exponentially. So, as you could look at a series like, I'm going to throw it off the top of my head, which they don't make anymore, Daredevil on Netflix. So obviously that is a series that does a lot of filming in buildings, and it does a lot of different scenes and stuff. But it's pretty much the same cast every episode, so they could put them together. There's occasionally a new person, not too many. They're always the same kind of sets. They're always, Earth, this place could double for another place. They're moving through the same buildings often quite, more than once. With Doctor Who, all that goes out the window. You've got the TARDIS, and that's pretty much it. It's like, okay, this week we're going to go to, revolutionary France. This week we're going to go to a burning moon in the Cascade Nebula, all that nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's like, you kind of feel like without that, Doctor Who isn't Doctor Who. But with that, it's going to be really difficult to do it socially distanced.
Although a thought I just had, as you were saying that, is that the possibility presents itself that Doctor Who could be forced to become more experimental with its storytelling. So you start to think about it, and we've seen examples of things recently like Talking Heads on the BBC and Isolation Stories on ITV. And I'm not expecting that the next series of Doctor Who will just be Jodie Whittaker and Amanda Gill delivering monologues straight down the camera.
Alan Bennett style. I would like to see that.
But could you tell a Doctor Who story in 2020, 2021 with a limited cast that does take place in one set? Could you make a virtue out of those challenges? You think an episode like Midnight might actually work reasonably well under these guidelines? And actually, a concept Doctor Who's explored before with the Doctor exiled to Earth in the early John Pertwee series. If you did something like that, which would be quite a drastic change, but that again might make it easier to produce a version of Doctor Who under these guidelines.
I think that reminds me. I think when Jodie Whittaker first started, we were sort of guessing whether she'd not get her TARDIS back for a few episodes and she'd be stuck on Earth like John Pertwee. It didn't happen, but you know, if anyone wants our ideas, they're probably still published on radiotimes.com. I kind of know what you mean. The one thing I would say is that I think the reason that we love those episodes like, you know, Blink and Midnight and stuff is that they're the exception rather than the rule. And I feel like you can definitely be experimental for a couple of episodes, but there comes a point at which it's not the same show anymore. Do you know what I mean? If it's all bottle episodes, it's all like smaller stories. We like the smaller stories because they're alongside something big and epic and cool.
Yeah.
If it was just for smaller stories, after a while, it's just going to seem like a smaller show, you know? And I think it's the problem I keep going back to with every single show being produced under social distancing is I kind of think, oh yeah, so we could do that and they could maybe just not do as much of that and they could, you know, push that together. And after a while you think they could just wait. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of like, do I want this sort of anemic version of the show that is kind of a half measure just put on the air for the sake of it? Or would it be better to hold off? And I think it's a difficult choice for a lot of people because, like you say, Doctor Who, they had a filming slot that they wanted to meet. They, you know, have presumably, you know, demands to meet. They have staff, a lot of freelance staff who you know, will want the work. But it is kind of like, at what point are you sacrificing, I mean, not to be too smarmy about it, the artistic vision of your show for just doing it for the sake of it? I mean, if they could come up with something amazing, like you say, definitely do it. But I am also a little bit like, you kind of don't want to get too far away from what Doctor Who is.
No, you're right, and there are you know, production issues and logistical issues and financial issues to consider. But purely on a creative level, you do think if it does, you know, as the head of BBC Wales was kind of implying, if it does appear that it's impossible to produce Doctor Who to the level we've come to expect under these circumstances, because it is a very ambitious and a very demanding show, is the best thing to do on a creative level, at least, to put it on hiatus for a little bit until it can be produced to the level we expect. Because I think you know, another possibility as well, whether, you know, even if the show meets its autumn, you know, filming start date, is that producing television under these guidelines means everything's going to cost more as well. Because there will be a slower rate of production because of the new procedures, which means that budgets will go up because the longer something takes to make, the more expensive it is. So, and Doctor Who is already a pretty expensive show for the BBC and its partners. So if Doctor Who's budget remains static, does that mean that we'll see fewer episodes for the same price? So what previously would have funded 10 episodes worth of Doctor Who might now only fund 8 or 6. So even if the show does stay on the air, it's possible we could see less of Doctor Who.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they could split it. You know, there's been rumours about that. You could split the series like they did with Matt Smith's second series. You know, do 6 episodes here, 4 episodes there, 5 and 5, something like that. Maybe trying to sort of do some stuff now, and then you got to think as well. Like, things change a lot, and it could be that, you know, the first 3 months of shooting it would be quite restricted, and then restrictions might relax a little bit for the second half, and it might get easier. One thing worth mentioning is you mentioned the money thing there, and that is a really good point. I mean, it's one of the things Eleanor brought up in a feature was, fundamentally, it's all more money. And the shows and the films that are starting to get back into production are things like Avatar and, you know, things like that, because they have the budget to do it. And one of the interesting ones is The Witcher has announced they're continuing filming in August. Obviously, that's the Henry Cavill thing. The Andrzej Sapkowski, I think is the author's name, adaptation, monster hunting and so on. And that show has a lot of prosthetics, a lot of costumes and makeup. It's kind of medieval. And I was quite surprised that they were one of the first shows to announce they're coming back. The one thing I did think was it's filmed in the UK and most of the cast are British, so that probably helps with travel restrictions. But the other thing is it's a Netflix show. Netflix has probably quite a lot of money. It was a big success for Netflix. They're probably willing to swallow the cost and just try and get it going. And I'm interested to see whether they take the same approach with Doctor Who coming from the BBC, and to what extent they think they have a duty to not spend more than they normally would, if that makes sense, given that it's, you know, money from the license fee, as well as obviously some commercial partners and so on. But there's an extent to which you kind of wonder, as much as The Witcher might kind of pave the way and might kind of give a few people some ideas. I mean, I don't know if Henry Cavill's going to get really into his monster makeup or something so he can do his own face, get his wig on himself. But it might, create a few procedures that would be helpful for other shows. Like over here, we've had shows like Loose Women and This Morning and things like that have been running all the way through lockdown. And I think that has helped people kind of work out some guidelines. Certainly overseas, some people have been adapting them. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one. I am really interested to see how The Witcher pans out and what that could mean for Doctor Who. And I do still think that if you were a Cyberman, you could put that on yourself.
Yeah, but as you say, the key thing there with The Witcher, Doctor Who could pick up a few tips and hints from The Witcher. But if The Witcher season 2 now takes twice as long or 3 times as long to produce, Netflix can take that financial hit. They can afford to cough up the extra dosh to make that happen. If Doctor Who is taking twice as long, 3 times as long to produce, and so is costing twice or 3 times as much, the BBC probably can't take that financial hit. As you say, they have other considerations to think about in terms of whether or not they can spend that much money on the show. So again, is it will we be looking at fewer episodes? Will we be looking at a hiatus? Again, that raises that question again.
Definitely. I mean, I would give anything to be a fly on the wall of the Doctor Who writers' room, or the Doctor Who writers' Zoom, probably at the moment. Just sort of seeing what they're trying to come up with. Because I bet there are definitely some of them coming up with kind of inventive ways around this. I mean, here's another question I have. I mean, slightly off topic maybe. To what extent do you think the show has to reference what's happened? I mean, to what extent will the Doctor mention, 2020, let's skip that one.
I feel like that is the degree to which it should be acknowledged.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess Doctor Who does feature present day scenes when the companions return home and things like that. And there's debate in general as to what extent dramas should reference contemporary dramas should reference coronavirus. Should AC-12 go into lockdown on line of duty? And there's an argument that yes, it should, because it should reflect reality with some certain things. So like the soaps. That is a slice of life, right? So it would be strange if EastEnders didn't reference coronavirus, because it would feel like the characters were living in a parallel world. It would be like someone not referencing some other huge historical event and acting like it never happened.
World War II canonically doesn't happen in Emmerdale.
Right,
anymore.
exactly. Whereas Doctor Who, because the argument is, should drama reflect life or should it be escapism when it comes to coronavirus? And Doctor Who is pure escapism as far as I'm concerned. You don't look to it. I mean, of course, it does reflect, certain topical issues and so on, but you don't look to it really to hold up a mirror to that kind of thing. I don't think you look for it to escape into time and space and have fun. I don't know. I don't really feel like it has a natural place in Doctor Who. I don't feel like it naturally fits within the format of the show.
I'm inclined to agree. I mean, we did get the Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor message for kids not to be scared, which is probably about as much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's about as much as we need from the Doctor Who coronavirus era.
Everything we've been discussing so far as well is all about how they'll film Doctor Who and so on. What about post-production? That's a whole other level of. I think I'm right in saying they have maybe been finishing off Revolution of the Daleks, which is this year's festive special, which was done filming before all this happened, but they maybe had to finish it up in post-production, post lockdown and so on. But could a whole series of Doctor Who be produced or post-produced if the normal resources aren't available, or if they're available to a more limited degree? So that's a whole other level again.
Definitely. I mean, it's a thing facing a lot of people on a lot of TV shows at the moment. I have seen with shows like The Mandalorian, which managed to finish shooting before lockdown, they have had to do it from home essentially, and they've said it's a slower process. I think functionally they can have the tech at home, but they just don't have as much processing power, and also you can't just have someone come over and chat to you about, about Alien doesn't look quite right. Can you change that? You have to kind of be zooming with someone, sharing your screen, and they, touch that and touch that. It just, everything, like with filming, just takes that little bit longer, and then it gets exponentially bigger.
Yeah, and Star Trek Discovery, I think, is another show that probably should have been back by now, the 3rd season, but it's taken longer to finish off because, as you say, it's so much harder to do that post-production from home. So even if they're able to film Doctor Who under these conditions, it would again take much longer for the post-production to get underway and be finished. So again, potentially more delays, another hiatus.
I mean, to be honest, yeah, I feel like we've talked ourselves into Doctor Who's definitely going to be delayed just through considering all these things.
But that's pure speculation on our part. It's worth saying the BBC has not confirmed that Doctor Who will be delayed.
No, I mean, to be honest, the BBC never even, I think, properly officially said when it was going to come back anyway. So they kind of can say, oh no, we always meant it to be in 2023. You know, we just thought now was the right time.
Yeah.
I would say as well, we are very lucky in that we will be getting Revolution of the Daleks filmed in 2019. That might be weird. Any characters hug, you have to shout, no, not allowed. But it was from the before times, so it's okay.
Yeah. And speaking of the before times as well, it's lucky in a way that Doctor Who has played with its format a little bit, even when it didn't have to, or at least not for the same reasons. So it's not as if we've had one series of so many episodes every year between 2005 and now, right? I mean, for the most part, we have had a series most years, but then we've also had years where there's been no Doctor Who, or where there has been just specials. So if the show were now to go that route because of coronavirus, it wouldn't feel, no pun intended, totally alien. Because we have experienced that kind of format shift before.
Definitely. I mean, we didn't have a series in 2016. We functionally didn't have anything. We had like one special right at the start of 2019, and then the next thing at the beginning of 2020. Like, I think fans were kind of already expecting a slightly longer gap anyway. And it might sting a little less when every other TV show is also off the air for longer than usual. But Doctor Who fans aren't alone suffering through a hiatus. We're all together. We're all in this together, and it being waiting for new drama content on the TV.
This is everybody's wilderness years.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, I can't wait for Line of Duty magazine to crop up in the interim, and a Big Finish will be doing all the Steve Arnott adventures. I've got the obligatory Big Finish mention. We almost didn't have it in this week, but
we always managed to work it in.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of interested to see how it all goes, and yeah, I mean, I would say actually, speaking of coronavirus influenced Doctor Who, if anyone is looking for stuff. Big Finish is doing a lot. There's, a lot of stuff being recorded in lockdown. They can just do that from home, Big Finish. Although I'm sure it is, again, harder. And a lot of fun news stories. And they've got, they're getting David Tennant and River Song to hang out, which is pretty cool. But yeah, anyway, that was not sponsored. I don't know why I did a little laugh at the Big Finish there, but I've just been looking at some of their catalogue.
Just goodwill.
Just goodwill, because we always make fun of Big Finish. So I'm going to be nice to Big Finish. Anyway, look, I feel like we've kind of covered the main points there. Doctor Who might be delayed, it might not. Either way, its future is looking quite different to what we would have expected. And that could be a good thing. Like Morgan says, it could turn into something that's more creatively fulfilling for the show. Could mean we get some amazing episodes we never would have. But also it could mean that, Doctor Who changes in a way that we don't like. But that's the fun thing about Doctor Who, because it can always change back. Isn't that right, Morgan?
And it can change and evolve. That's what we say at pretty much every episode, that if you don't like what Doctor Who's like at the moment, that's fine, because it'll be different in a bit. Yeah, don't worry about it.
It'll be different in that the Doctor won't be able to hug anyone and she'll have to shout across the TARDIS to Yaz.
I was trying to think about it. Does the Doctor hug her fam a lot? It feels like
He's not going to now.
Definitely not now. Yeah, I'm socially awkward. I'm not going to hug you.
Yeah. Wink. Anyway, listen, everyone listening at home, thanks for tuning in to Radio Times Radio, the hot news station that everyone's talking about. There's loads of Doctor Who stuff on radiotimes.com. As ever, we've got some stuff about the Big Finish things I mentioned. We've got a few things about Revolution of the Daleks and how coronavirus could affect Doctor Who. I've been Huw Fullerton.
I've been Morgan Jeffrey.
And goodbye.